Thank you for joining me at this panel. This is Reincarnated at a FurryCon. This is a panel about original English light novels and how they relate to furry fiction, especially early furry fiction, and how you, as a writer or someone who is interested in writing, may be interested in pursuing original English light novel writing or some subset of it in relation to your own furry fiction and how you may want to write original English light novels. Or maybe you just want to learn about this strange thing that you read about in the con book. So a little bit about myself. My name is Tarl Voice Hotch. I'm predominantly a erotic and horror writer inside and outside of the fandom. I also have edited a number of anthologies, both inside and outside of the fandom. I write for Hentai Diaries, which is an online dating sim game. I'm one of the 4 hosts of Fangs and Fonts, a writing podcast that tackles anthropomorphic fiction, among other things. And I own a small Canadian press called Armored Fox Press, which deals primarily in anthropomorphic fiction as well as anime-themed fiction. So, what is a light novel, for those of you that don't know? Well, a light novel is something that came about in Japan, and it's been around for quite some time. Some people will sit there and argue that it evolved from penny dreadfuls and pulp fiction. I can see the similarities between them, but in itself, light novels are kind of their own separate thing. A light novel is generally around 50,000 words, which in the West we consider a novella. The reason for this is because of ease of reading. Generally, a lot of them are meant to be read, say, on your phone or tablet as you're commuting. So you really want it to be kind of shorter fiction. They also generally come from web novels, which again are supposed to be read on a tablet or your phone, and have been basically scouted by publishers or editors off of web novel sites, which are a huge thing in Japan, or one of the many contests that are held yearly in Japan, where the select winner, who is the most popular, ends up getting their work published. But generally they are shorter work. Now, by no means does this mean that all light novels are 50K. Quite frankly, I've read some fairly long ones and I've read some fairly short ones. But generally they tend to be in this novella side kind of style range. They are geared towards the young adult and new adult demographic, which is new adult, by the way, is teens to late 20s. So where pulp fiction and penny dreadfuls were kind of aimed towards the masses and the generally adults, due to their sensational and titillating subject matter, light novels are for basically kids and young adults / early adults, as new adult as it's now being called. They're meant for people who are in high school, entering college, university, things like that. They're meant more of kind of popcorn fiction versus a lot of the more serious YA that you find over here in the West, like Harry Potter, Twilight, etc., etc., etc. So you end up seeing a lot more of lighter themes, but that's not to say that light novels can't handle heavier themes, because a lot of them often do. Light novels tend to be dialogue heavy compared to novels out here in the West. You tend to see a lot more dialogue than you do in your primary works. A lot of interactions between characters is done in dialogue, and in some cases you will see it where you will desperately try to figure out who's talking, because there'll just be so many people conversing at one point, and you're just, you kind of have to backtrack and go, okay, who is saying what? Unless you get one of those really good writers who can differentiate just by the way they're talking who each person is. Light novels also focus on intercharacter relationships, um, which goes to the dialogue thing. It's less about the plot, more about how the characters are interacting with one another. You don't get necessarily get grand set pieces like you would in Western YA. You end up getting a lot of just inner thoughts. A lot of light novels tend to be first person, so you can be right there inside the mind of the protagonist. So you end up getting a lot more introspection and relationship development between the characters, which for anyone who really likes that can be a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of the stuff we have out here in the West. Also, the primary character tends to be more of a blank slate in light novels. The reason is they're meant to be a kind of self-insert model for the reader. You end up seeing yourself as that character, and you're going to go do things that, you're kind of along for the ride, putting yourself into the mindset of said character. You don't so much get that in the West. You get a lot of fully fleshed out protagonists who you know their innermost secrets, you know their innermost desires, you know everything that's happened to them, and there's no way that you'll just insert yourself to them. And it gives you just like the smallest margin to relate to that character. It's a lot harder to relate to a Western written character as opposed to, say, a character in a light novel or a web novel. The illustrations. In light novels, the artist who does the illustrations tends to get the same amount of clout as the author themselves. Every light novel that's written tends to have illustrations at the start of the book, just a couple color illustrations, and then a smattering of illustrations throughout the book itself. This is to help with the illustration of the characters, and it also serves another purpose, which I'll mention later on. Generally, the reason the artist gets a lot of credit is because when a light novel, say, gets picked up for a manga, a lot of manga, whoever the manga artist is, will actually take the style of that artist and translate it into the manga. And then when it gets an anime adaptation, same thing there. The art style tends to be taken over into the animation itself, the anime. So it's, as an artist, if you're working along with a light novel and it sees one of these two forms, it's the ultimate sense of flattery that your art style is essentially being used or copied by said artists. Or maybe you're doing the manga yourself. The reason you have the artist is important is because of those splash pages at the beginning of the work show you the characters. When you go into a light novel, you know immediately who the characters are and what they look like, because right there in the front few pages is, here's the protagonist, here are the other characters, and here's what they look like. And because of that, you don't have to question it, and a lot of stuff doesn't have to be said involving the description of said characters. The last thing is that light novels are serialized, and this is so that you continue to purchase their books. Light novels generally, as I said, kind of come off of web novels, and because of that, a lot of web novels are meant to be serialized so that someone comes back. If you really, really enjoy it, you're going to keep reading it, much like a webcomic. And with light novels, because they're based off of that format, they are meant to be where you put one down and you can literally go to the next one and the next one, the next one. And some of the really long running ones are on their 13th, 14th, 15th volume. So it just keeps driving you and keeps wanting you to do the story. And the thing is that's why you end up getting with mini arcs within each book. So one book might be, let's take Overlord, for example. I think the second book is about the Lizardmen tribe. Whole book's basically about them and their interaction with Ainz Gould and the Tomb of Nazarick. And then two novels are about the human kingdoms, and another one's about a war and things like that. And it kind of just progresses from one point to another where you're just like, okay, I really enjoyed that. I want to find out what happens here. I want to find out what happens here. And you just keep buying them. And that's, from a publisher standpoint, that's a good thing because it means the publisher's making money and you're garnering more of a fan base and you're building that writer's platform, which I'm sure anyone who has watched my writer's platform panels can tell you I think is a good thing, is when you have a basis to sit there and go off of. So now that I've gone through kind of what a light novel is, how does this relate to furry fiction? Well, the thing with furry fiction is kind of an anomaly in a fandom. Sure, you get people writing fiction in, say, the Star Trek fandom, and you have people writing Star Wars fiction and whatnot, but those all get relegated to fan fiction because you're taking an existing property and you're writing on it. In furry fiction, furries are the genre. We have a love of furries, and furries, with their huge history and whatnot, don't really have a collective entity like, say, Star Wars or Star Trek and things like that. So furry is kind of its own thing, its own style, its own, I don't want to say genre, it's more of like a pseudo genre that gets a blanket that's tossed over a story. Here's a fantasy story, toss a blanket over it, now it's a furry fantasy story. Well, light novels are kind of like that. You have a fantasy story, you toss a blanket over it, it's now a fantasy light novel story. And you may think, well, that's just a, Tarl, that's just a novel. What does that have to do? Why is that different? Well, for one thing, all the things that I've already previously mentioned, but also because light novels are so unique and they're very specific in how they sound and write and the way that they're composed, that they have a certain feel about it. I mean, I've sat there and talked about how, say, I don't personally consider Redwall a furry book. Now, before you get mad, I will admit, yes, it fits within the realm of furry fiction. But the only reason I say that I don't really think it's furry fiction is because I myself would rather see furry fiction be its own thing. I would like to see furry fiction created by furries, by people who want to do this kind of thing. That's not to say that Brian Jack, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, isn't doing things like that. Actually, I think he hates furries, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to go do my research and I don't have time for that right now. But the thing is that with light novels, they have a certain feel to it. Furry fiction has a certain feel to it. And you don't really notice what that feel is until you get people who aren't furries writing furry fiction. There's a few anthologies that I've done where non-furries have submitted works for. And it's always kind of interesting to read those stories because they tend to be absolutely amazing because they don't have a lot of the hang-ups that furry writers tend to have. They don't write the tropish things that a lot of furry writers do. And it's a breath of fresh air. And that can be really, really wonderful to read, especially if you are a publisher and you're reading a slush pile continually. Light novels are very much the same. I can sit there and pick up a light novel versus a standard novel, and probably within the first 2 or 3 chapters, I can tell you if it's a light novel or a novel, just by the way that it, the mouth feel, if you will. So when it comes to original English light novels, here you have a bunch of people who have read light novels, watched anime, maybe grown up with anime like I did, and they're all excited. They're like, hey, I really like this. I want to write anime. Light novels are the closest thing that they're ever going to do, except unless they're just talented enough to do art. I mean, how many furry writers wish they could sit there and do art so they could just do furry comics and get all the praise that furry artists do, which is often far more than us in the writing community and the fandom get. So same thing goes with these original English light novel readers and then writers, as they've looked at it and said, hey, you know what, I've read, and I know this is going to be backwards on the screen, but just bear with me. I've read Reincarnated as a Sword, Ascendance of a Bookworm, Era Fruetta, and they've gone, well, why can't I write like that? Why can't I write my own anime story? And that's sort of what furry fiction did, is people looked at, stuff that people were writing that was furry fiction and went, well, why can't I write a talking animal story? I love talking animal stories. I, grew up on whatever show was around at the time. You watch Disney's Robin Hood and you're like, well, why can't I write a story about talking animals set in medieval England? And that's where furry fiction came about. And then much the same with the original English light novel community. So another thing is that both furry fandom and original English light novels generally are sold through con sales or through self-publishing. We in the furry fandom are lucky in that we've been around for a fair amount, and we actually have a significant number of publishers who are publishing furry works. We have Fur Planet, we have Sofa Wolf, we have Rabbit Valley, to name the three big ones. These are publishers who have been around for an extremely long time, and they are good at what they do. And then from there, we have a lot of smaller presses, much like Armored Fox. With the original English light novel publishers, they've got maybe 3 or 4, if that, where furry has a significantly lot more than that. And we're also hitting mainstream. With the original English light novels, because it is such a new genre and people are starting to get into it, they're just kind of starting to develop. And that's where I said it kind of reminds me of early furry fiction, where they're just kind of feeling out who they are. Communities are starting to build, and they're starting to kind of form these groups that, started to form way back when. They even have technically their own version of Kyle Gold, which is Brian Varnell, hopefully I'm getting his last name right, who wrote American Kitsune, which, if you haven't picked it up, is well worth picking up. He's a good author. But he started writing original English light novels before they had a name as original English light novels. He was just, he watched anime, he wanted to write anime, and so he did. Just much like a lot of furry writers saw furry, said, hey, I want to write furry stories, and then did. So that's kind of where they go. With the con sales and with the self-publishing, anyone who's been to an anime con can definitely say that compared to a lot of furry cons, they tend to be a lot larger, and especially if you were a vendor, a lot harder to sell at, just because of the sheer size of a lot of the venues, unless you're at Anthrocon. And then you get kind of the idea of what I'm talking about. That said, you're also competing against people who are bringing in actual manga, actual light novels, and actual anime to compete against. So you present an original English light novel, you are already up against a far heavier competition than, say, you would as a furry writer. Ad space. One thing that furries, especially furry publishers, do not so well is advertising. Furry has a lot of stigma behind it, and which is unfortunate. Anyone who got into the fandom around the whole CSI era knows that thing has haunted us, and it's been 20 years Like, can society not move past that? Can society not move past furries as sexual deviants? That sort of thing. Whereas in anime, especially nowadays, is a lot more welcome than it used to be. I would argue more so than furry. Actually, I just saw on the news that one of the largest car shows in the United States had far more anime cars than they did souped up cars. Whoever would have thought that was a thing? Whoever would have thought that would have happened? Netflix has anime on it. All the PS store and the Xbox stores have anime on it. They're airing anime all the time on TV, and now we've got things like Castlevania and such where they're making westernized anime, much like Avatar. So yeah, there's still the kind of the weeb and otaku kind of stigma. Sure, I'm not going to say that hasn't gone anywhere, but I would say that furries have kind of still a lot more of a worse stigma to it. That's why when it comes to advertising light novels, you kind of have a little more of a venue to attract your customer base. Take, for example, there was a English light novel that just got published not too long ago, and the person put out a press kit to, of all places, Crunchyroll, and I kind of read it, I'll admit, and went and kind of chuckled and said, yeah, good luck with that. Crunchyroll posted it and talked about this original light novel, and it blew my mind. Sure, there were the general trolls, of any comment section on any website sitting there trashing the art style, talking about Brian Varnell being better, etc., etc. But the thing is this person's stuff got shown on a very public, very well-used, media platform. And that's insane. And you're not, besides for enough furries I can list on one hand, can I sit there and say that furry fiction has gotten that much notice? Ursula Vernon being probably the biggest right now, just as she's won a number of awards outside of the furry fandom. And, congrats to her and everything that she's done, because that's freaking phenomenal. So when you want to do, say you want to write light novels, and where do you start? As a light novel writer, what can you expect? Well, first of all, there's a couple things that you can read to kind of help you. And this is sort of where I started on my journey. There's a wiki how on how to write light novels. It's interesting. I wouldn't say it's the greatest, but it's interesting. Same with Source Expert. There's an article on there on how to write a light novel. But there's also an article by Melissa Wong called So You Want to Write Your Own Light Novel, which I found to be quite enjoyable and quite an informative read. But the one that takes the cake and the one that is heads and tails above is How to Write Light Novels and Web Novels by R.A. Patterson. This guy knows what he's talking about. This guy has put together basically a definitive collection of kind of mini essays, I would say, about how to write a web novel versus how to write a light novel, what they are, what the top genres are. And he goes through like Chinese web novels, Japanese web novels, etc., and breaks it all down as to what's popular, what are their genres. You want to know what isekai is? He goes into topics as to what isekai is. He goes into, what makes light novels light novels. Like, the amount of research that this person has done is phenomenal. And when I had bought this book, I kind of expected a garbage been fire. I didn't expect this person to do the research they did because I checked out their writer's platform and I couldn't find anything. Boy, was I wrong. This person is a phenomenal writer, and I'm still plowing through the book because I bought it for my Kobo. And I'm going to end up getting a hard copy just so I can have around the house, because the amount of times I've gone back and kind of referenced certain things it's very useful. It is a resource that I think if you want to get into writing original English light novels, you should do. It also will help with your furry writing for the most part. Though again, if you're going to write furry stuff like you would original English light novels, you may succeed or you may fail, depending on the fact that there's a number of differences between the two. When it comes to original English light novels, there's only really 4 publishers that I can kind of talk about for now. You have Armored Fox Press, which is Canadian based. Right now, there's 1 published work that's a light novel, and then 3 upcoming. You have Vix Lab, which is in kind of an interesting situation. It's more of a forum-based website, and every year Vix Lab holds a writing contest. And if your selection ends up being the most popular, they will publish your work. By the way, if you hear weird wheezing noise, it's my cat. He's asleep up there, so I apologize for all of that. So they have about 13 light novels. They're a US-based company, and all in all, their forum has kind of seen a bit of a decline in the last couple of years. I've been on there, and generally I'm finding that there's a couple ad bots and there's a couple people who are just trying to keep things alive, and I'm one of them. But if you want to try your hand at getting published through a small press, through a contest style, they're the ones to do it. And they handle everything in regards to, the publishing work like a standard publisher would. Then there's Novel Horizon. They've got currently 6 novels that are done. They've got a Discord group, and they look very professional. I haven't had a chance to dig too deep into them, but they seem to know what they're doing. And if you're looking to get a light novel published, they would be one of the people that I would definitely recommend you check out. Lastly is Orion Writing Studio. One of the interesting things that I find with English light novels, and especially since I started Armored Fox, is generally people who want to write English light novels are from North America or India, or that kind of general area. It's fascinating, and it's something that I kind of took me by surprise and has been a welcome change. Orion Writing Studio has a Discord group. And again, if you're looking to learn about writing light novels or the genre, I would highly recommend you check them out. They're currently doing a writing prompt contest, and they do monthly contests where you can win yourself anything from money to upgrading your Discord to getting published in their magazine, which they publish through Amazon. They are a wonderful batch, and I love them dearly. And quite frankly, if I had to choose, and this is going to sound bad, but if I had to choose between the furry fandom writing community as a whole and the writing community and Orion, I would be hard pressed to choose between the two. I have not met a more welcoming group and more understanding group in the Orion Writing Studio than I have anywhere else. They honestly feel like family, and it honestly feels like they want to see me succeed as much as I want to see them succeed. And they have a lot of people of various different skill sets there, that if you need something done, you've got it. They have artists, they have typesetters, and these are things that these people want to do professionally. So you're helping them grow their business. So the other route is as I said, self-published. You have Brian Varnell and his American Kitsune series. You also have DC Craig. This is Reincarnated as a Familiar. This is, I actually just picked this up because I watched the development of this work. His Twitter is very interesting to read. Example of interior art. His writing is phenomenal, and it overall is a very, very enjoyable book. And I am looking forward to finishing it at some point. It's basically your standard isekai story. Teacher ends up dying one way or another. I actually can't remember right now, and gets reincarnated as the familiar to a young girl in a magic academy. I'd hate to say like Harry Potter isekai, because it's not. It's very much feels like a light novel. It very much feels like an anime, like My Witch Academia and things like that. So for various sources, if you want to cut your teeth on this, you can try one of the novel writing websites. There's, again, as I said, Orion Writing Studio, where you can sit there and talk about your work and post your work. There's Outer Haven, Honeyfeed, and Voice Me. These are generally places where you can sit there and publish your web novel if you want to go that route. There are definitely certain benefits to it, much like writing, say, fan fiction. You can post your works, give your tags, and build your fan base based off of that. And you never know, a publisher might pick you up for it. Not as likely as if you were, say, Japanese writing in one of their websites. But at the same point, you can definitely get a good idea and a good feel of what works and what doesn't for serialized fiction. And, for example, Voice Me will promote your work quite heavily on social media, which I find amazing. And they do a lot of pairings with other companies. I personally don't really have a need or want to write web novels. That might change in the future, but it's definitely something that I think you should check out if you're interested in kind of doing that route. So light novels. Give me a brief second. Sorry about that. Had to feed the cats, or I was going to have yelling felines in my video. So, light novels. Why would I recommend them to aspiring writers or writers in the furry fandom? One of the things is that there's a certain admiration I have towards light novel writers. And I think anyone who was raised in Western society, going to Western schools, will kind of be able to relate to. If you've watched my writer's block video, this kind of goes into the whole how we have criticism and how we handle criticism in our minds and how that often causes writer's block. The long and short of it is that generally and painful moments in our lives are short-tracked into our long-term memory. So you'll remember them far stronger and far longer than you would anything else. So generally when you come up against writer's block, that's generally one of the things that ends up being the cause, is that you've kind of ended up facing, this in your past. Generally, as most people will say, and when they talk about how they got into writing and whatnot, the teacher with the red pens who just wrote all over your work gave you, you wrote this really amazing, fantastic story, and they gave you an F just because they didn't like your story. Light novels are interesting in that, as R.A. Patterson stated, they are efficient and fearless. With efficient, they do whatever works. They do the exact opposite of every piece of advice I've given and other people have given. They tell. They don't show. And basically, part of the reason for this is they don't know any better. And this ties into the second point for being fearless. But generally, they're trying to get something across. They don't have the time or the want or the desire to sit there and show you everything that's happening. They want to sit there and get to the interesting parts, to, they want you to understand what's going on, and they want you to, just have it happen and go through it. So if Jane is sad, they will just flat out tell you Jane is sad. They're not going to sit there and talk about how Jane sat at the, bus stop with her head in her hands, clearly, her shoulders shaking as so-and-so walks up. They're going to say, Dean walked up to Jane and Jane was sad, sitting down beside her, etc., etc. They also will do things in the shortest and simplest way possible. They have a story that's set in 16th century England. They will say, this story, the buildings around them look like 16th century England. I got teleported to this world, and it looks like a furry con. That's it. That's your world building. And this is going to drive some of you crazy. And other ones, you're going to find it stupidly refreshing. Much like when you sit down and you try to write a fan fiction versus writing something else. They're not going to sit there and describe to you in great detail what 16th century England is. They're going to sit there and just tell you it's 16th century England and assume you know what that looks like. And if you don't, you're going to do a quick Google search. I mean, that's why you have your phone, and know kind of what it looks like. That's why a lot of isekais take place in fantasy worlds, is because, especially Tolkienized fantasy worlds, is because everyone knows what D&D looks like. Everyone knows what Tolkien stuff looks like. It's, especially after the movies, it's ingrained in everyone's mind. So when someone says, oh, look, it's an orc, you're going to sit there and know what an orc looks like. I mean, that's one of the big reasons Games Workshop has been trying so hard to rebrand itself, is because they started off as, a Tolkien-based fantasy, and they realized that they can't copyright that after they lost their copyright suit on a furry author for using Space Marines. So that's why they changed everything, and Space Marines became Adeptus Astartes, and Imperial Guard became whatever they are, mostly because they started to get sued by the actual Imperial Guard, which exists on this planet, and kind of was a nice ironic twist when it comes to the suing of the furry writer over their book Space Marine. Interesting thing, rabbit hole if you want to go down. Kind of surprised that it was a furry. So basically, yeah, so it's simplistic. They want to sit there and get it all down fast enough, especially if they're writing a web novel, because they don't have a lot of time to sit there and write long prose over what it looks like and describing everything. They want to get their next chapter out so their fans can read it. They don't have time to sit there and just go into in-depth detail and bore the crap out of the writers or the readers. Now, the fearless part is the thing that I kind of am envious of. They do what they want. And they're not restricted like other authors are. Anyone who has gone to school in the US or Canada has sat there and been told, show, don't tell. You've got to frame things a certain way. You've got to be restrictive to the grammar. You can't have overpowered main protagonists. You can't have Mary Sues. You can't self-insert. I myself have sat there and gone after stories that are clearly self-inserts of the author. And yeah, I mean, if something is a self-insert, am I going to go after it? Probably. even if it is a light novel, just because in my mind, the light novel, as I've already mentioned, the main character, your protagonist, should be a blank slate for self-insertion of the actual reader themselves, not so much the author. But a lot of light novels are power fantasies. They're over-the-top characters. They are there for one reason or another. Era Fruetta is about a guy who was bullied in school, and they get teleported to another world. He's given a shit job that's basically the blacksmith of the world, and one of his buddies is jealous because the pretty girl actually likes him, and he's oblivious, and tries to kill him. And in doing so, he ends up fighting for his life, basically living on the edge of life in the bottom of this labyrinth, and through doing so gains a ton of power and basically becomes super overpowered. He gives himself guns. He drives a freaking Hummer and a motorcycle. He has a rail gun. He has a cybernetic arm. Like, he is extremely overpowered. And he collects a harem of women who all want to sleep with him because he's overpowered. And weirdly enough, unlike other harem animes and novels, he is only really interested in this girl, Yue, which I find quite refreshing when it comes to harem animes, especially ones. But it's a power fantasy. Same thing with Reincarnated as a Sword. Guy dies, gets reincarnated as a sword, which has the ability to steal powers from any monster it kills, gets the heart crystal from. Teams up with a young cat girl and basically shares his abilities with her and makes her overpowered. And it just follows their adventures. So I'm a spider. So what? This just came out as an anime. I have the plush right here. And you have a spider who, she's reincarnated, her whole class is reincarnated. She gets stuck in a dungeon, finds out she's a spider, almost gets killed a number of times, but in doing so collects a bunch of skills and becomes overpowered. So, yeah, I mean, see the theme here? But again, you have to remember who these are for. These are for the new adults and young adults. And the thing is as a wonderful meme said, a demotivational poster from back when that was a thing on the internet, and it's Conan, and it says, Conan, picture of Conan, naked girls around him, sword, you know, you've got it in your head, because we all have day jobs. Conan exists as a power fantasy. Conan gets the girl. Conan succeeds in everything. Conan is everything that the average male, especially at that time, was not. And a lot of people enjoyed it, especially a lot of younger readers, especially younger, boys, because they looked at it and said, I want to have that power. I am powerless in my life. I want that. He-Man's the same way. Here's this bronze, muscular guy, and when Prince Adam, even though Prince Adam was ripped as hell, transformed into He-Man, he was super strong. He was fighting evil. What boy didn't want that? What boy didn't want to have that kind of power, especially ones who were picked on? And the furry fandom, and I'm going to say this, is we attract a lot of people like that. And it's because we are an open and accepting fandom, and that, hooray on us. A lot of people find a lot of solstice within us. Same thing with the anime community. And that's why these books exist, is they want to sit there and tell a story about someone who is OP, so that the reader can insert themselves into that character and feel good about it and go, ha ha ha, look at this awesome scene where he does this. That is so amazing. I wish when I was in high school and junior high that, this stuff existed back then, instead of me having to sit there and sneak into a porn shop underage so I can buy a box set of Lotus War or things like that, where anime was just breaking out and I was trying to find everything I can, and all I had was Ranma One Half OVAs dubbed in Vancouver. So, and I mean, I would have loved it. I mean, I probably would have been embarrassing and cringeworthy, but I would have been happy. And that's why a lot of people are reading them now, and a lot of people, especially isekais, where they're transported to another world and they become overpowered. That's why people are into it. But as I said, there's ones that aren't necessarily for children. Sure, anyone who's watched anime and any of the news knows the interspecies reviewers. This is the light novel for that. It's hot. It's also 18 plus, quite 18 plus. Interestingly enough, reads a lot different than a lot of furry erotica. Quite a nice difference in my mind. You have J.K. Horu is a sex worker. This is in another world. This is an isekai where a girl gets transported with a kind of a otaku nerd. He gets all the OP powers. She becomes a sex worker because in a fantasy world, that's all women are treated to. And then she finds out, after sleeping with a god, that she can steal people's powers by having sex with them. It's an interesting concept, and it's an interesting book. But again, it's erotic, but it's erotic in a completely different way than, say, furry fiction is. But the reason these all exist is because the writers were fearless. They didn't sit there and listen to their inner critic that has formed over years of learning. They've most likely sat there and done web novels that got popular, and then once they got super popular, someone reached out to them and said, hey, do you want to publish this as a novel? And of course, who's going to say no to that? And that's where I'm jealous. Because to be a light novel writer, you have to sit down and basically be fearless. You kind of need to toss the proper writing aside and do this. And I think some furry writers, that might be the kick in the bottom that they need to write. Because sitting there having 3 dialogue tags around something to symbolize that 3 people have said the same thing, or just once, hey, what about us? Times 3. That's not proper writing in the slightest. But it's published and it works. So why not? And that's the thing. So since I've got about 13-ish minutes left, so if you're interested in writing a light novel, if you enjoy anime and you've kind of been curious as to where a lot of these animes that have come out are from, like Ascendance of a Bookworm, Interspecies Reviewers, So I'm a Spider, So What, Overlord. By the way, if you're ever in a bookstore, go look up the Overlord light novels. They're all hardcover and they're freaking gorgeous. I want a set just because of how gorgeous they are. But go check them out. And write. Just sit down and try to shut up that inner editor and just read some light novels and write. There's nothing stopping you. And there are now publishers out there who are publishing original English light novels. And there are people who are doing web novels for it and being successful. And there's people who are self-publishing them and being successful. This guy's on his 3rd, or he's writing his 4th book. He just published his 3rd. And frick, the amount of skyrocketing popularity that this person has is astounding. And it's interesting to look at it from a furry writer going, furry is fun to write. Furry is amazing. And we have a ton of furry writers out there. But we've kind of evolved as a writing community, and there's a lot of resources. But because we're so large, you get a lot of the faults too. The original English light novel community is still relatively small. It's relatively new. And there's a lot of people in there who are in the same boat where they're just starting out. And they will give you a hand. And that's not to say that the furry fandom doesn't have people who will give you a hand, because we do. There's a lot. There's the Furry Writers Guild. And there's various, Discords and Tumblr group, not Tumblr, Twitter group, not Twitter, Telegram groups that will give you a hand if you have questions and you want to know. So it's not like the resources aren't there, and people are willing to give you a hand and kind of process it. But a lot of the furry writers have gotten away from anthologies. There's only 2, maybe 3 who are still doing anthologies. Armored Fox is one of them. And that kind of closes a lot of doors when it comes to people who just want to write furry fiction, but they don't want to write novels. They want to write short stories. If you want to write a novel, I recommend writing short stories first. I recommend you cut your chops on that. It's a good way to build your writer's platform so people know who you are and your style and what you like. And if you want to write original English light novels, go for it. Armored Fox has a couple anthologies open. Just go to just Google Armored Fox Press and you'll come to our website. We have a number of calls on it for short stories. We're doing an isekai anthology called Isekai Me right now, where we're looking for stories about people who get transported to another world. Kind of loosely inspired upon the anthology Hitchhiker's Guide to Isekai, because you don't see a lot of isekai short stories, and I'm curious as to what people will do. And we're already starting to get submissions for it, so don't wait too long. Sit down and write. Because realistically, when it comes to light novels, there's no true wrong way. That's the fearless part of it. You got to go in and just write and have fun. And that's the joy of writing an original English light novel, is you're writing to have fun. You're not writing to make money. You're not writing to become famous. You're writing because you have a story inside you that you want to tell. And if that just happens to be your personal fantasy of being transported to another world and marrying a goblin barmaid, then by all means, write it. Because there's going to be someone out there who really wants to read that. And you'll find that the whole process is quite opening and quite enjoyable. And as I'm sure you're an anime fan, you're going to find that it's kind of fun writing anime because it's just so over the top sometimes. So, in conclusion, if you have any questions, feel free to message me. I'm on Telegram @VoiceSpider. I'm on Twitter @VoiceSpider. You can send me an email at tarlwriter@gmail.com. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at Armored Fox, which is armoredfoxpress@gmail.com. And yeah, take a look. I would love to have people submit works, be they furry or light novels. I really think that a lot of people came to furry through anime. I did. I freaking love cat girls. Or boys, depending. This is Team Felix. And that's how I came into anime or into furry. And I didn't think that was going to be the case, but it was. And I love it. And I found a good community here, and I found an amazing community in the original English light novel community. So yeah, submit some short stories. Sit down and write for the sheer pleasure of writing. Write the story you want to, write. And if your main character happens to be a self-insert power fantasy, then all the more power to you. We'll say it may not guarantee that you get into any books or anthologies, but there are many resources to turn it into a web novel. And you may find that you get popular and well-known in that, probably more so than you would if you ever actually published the work normally. And there is nothing wrong with that, because that means people are enjoying your works, something that you've created. Your baby is out there in the world, and they like it. And that's always an amazing feeling. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this panel. And if you have any questions about light novels or anything pertaining to how to write or anything I haven't really covered on here, this is only my second time running this panel, and I'm still kind of streamlining it. But yeah, if you have questions, send me a DM on Twitter or send me an email, and yeah, I'll have a chat. Anyway, thank you for attending, and hopefully it's not as hot as it is today, because I'm recording this on Canada Day and I am roasting upstairs in my room. So have a good evening, and yeah, talk to you later. Enjoy the rest of the call.
Welcome to Furry, held in beautiful Edmonton, Alberta. Upon your arrival, simply head to the check-in desk and see one of the friendly hotel staff. Rooms are located in the North Tower and in the East Tower. Our hotel features spacious rooms in single queen, double queen, king, and queen and king suites. Be sure to check out the hotel guide. All guest rooms feature flat screen TVs and free hotel Wi-Fi. If you're hungry, don't forget to check out Gray's Restaurant, home of the included breakfast buffet, free to all registered hotel guests. Now lie back, get some rest, and get ready to enjoy everything that Furry has to offer.
Hi, I'm Naboa. Did you know that when Underdogs Rescue places a dog in a foster home, they supply everything that the foster home could possibly need? Everything from the food, a large crate, vet visits, training sessions, and more are all covered by Underdogs. But all those things cost money, and with no Furry and COVID-19 lingering, Underdogs has had very little in the way of donations this year, which makes it very hard for them to keep helping their dogs. This is why we're asking you to donate whatever you can to Underdogs by going to underdogsrescue.com and click on that donate button. You'll make a difference, and the doggies will thank you for it. Thank you.